Welcome to the Macmillan Report. I'm Marilyn Wilkes, your host, and our guest is Professor John Roemer, the Elizabeth S. and A. Varick Stout Professor of Political Science and Economics. Professor Roemer's research concerns political economy and distributive justice. His books include Racism, Xenophobia, and Distribution, Democracy, Education, and Equality, Political Competition, Equality of Opportunity, and Theories of Distributive Justice. Professor Roemer is here today to talk about the future of capitalism. Welcome, Professor Roemer.
Thank you, Marilyn.
In your most recent work, you explore the future of capitalism. Give us your perspective.
Well, because we're in this massive crisis, a lot of people are talking about what should be done to prevent these crises from happening in the future, as well as obviously solving the present crisis. Mm-hmm. But I think there's been a wrong-headed approach to the question of how to prevent these crises in the future in the following sense, that all the discussants in this debate, or almost all of them, take people as they are, including people on Wall Street, and are trying to design techniques to make sure that a system which is run by people a financial sector that's run in large part by people who are out to maximize their wealth and are greedy, that will work even under such a system. And I think the history of capitalism shows that there's really no way of designing a foolproof set of rules that will work if there are intelligent and avaricious people who want to circumvent them.
Okay, so how do the preferences of individuals fit into your theory?
So there's been a very active area of research in economics over the last 30 years, which attempts to design rules which will lead people, regardless of what their values or preferences are, to do things which are socially optimal, good for the welfare of people. The simplest example with which most people are familiar is the Adam Smith quote that even though the baker and the candlestick maker and so on are out for their own good and out to maximize their own profits, in a market system with competition, if they do so, that will lead to the social good. Well, there's been a lot of criticism of that naive, laissez-faire philosophy in the last 100 years, at least. But in the last 30 years, as I said, there's been an effort in economics to see if we can design more sophisticated systems of rules that will work even when people are greedy and avaricious and are only looking out for themselves. Work in the sense of delivering outcomes that are good for society. And in fact, the Nobel Prize was awarded to 3 economists 2 years ago who were instrumental in developing this area. My view, however, is that it's really not going to be possible to design such rules, given people who are avaricious and out only for themselves, that the only hope of designing rules which will bring about a good outcome in society and in a market economy is if people's preferences change and become more concerned with other people, more solidaristic. Mm-hmm.
You argue that crises can bring about greater social insurance. What do you mean by that?
So, how would preferences change? I'm not a utopian in the sense that I don't believe that jawboning by even as charismatic a politician as Barack Obama or other leaders or more ethics courses in business schools is going to be enough to get people to think more solidaristically. I think, however, that there are laws of motion of the development of solidarity, and my own view is that crises can start off a sequence of events that may end up in people's becoming more solidaristic and changing their values and their preferences.
Do you think that it's possible for capitalism to achieve stability and relative equality of condition?
So let me before I get to that, let me
Okay.
explain this sequence of events.
Okay.
So one thing that crises do is they tend to reduce all people to the same situation. They wipe out wealth. In particular, they make the risks that different people face much more similar than they were before the crisis. So middle class people, let's say, and working class people now are facing risks which are much more similar with respect to unemployment and the possibility of financing their retirement than was the case before the crisis. And when people face risks, when people have risk exposures, which are very similar in terms of the chances of good and bad things happening to them, it's much easier to design universal insurance. Everybody will want the insurance. And so, in particular, I think that one good consequence of this current crisis, every cloud has a silver lining, is that national health insurance will be much easier to pass now because there'll be much more universal support for it. I think once these insurance is extended in this manner, then I think people's preferences change because they begin to like the society where a certain kind of poverty is eliminated. There won't be people without insurance. There won't be crowded emergency rooms full of uninsured poor people who can't get care any other way. And even costs will probably go down because, or they won't accelerate so fast, because with universal insurance, the government will have an incentive to keep prices down, and for instance, drug prices. So it seems to me that what will happen is after the passage of health insurance, people will come to like that new kind of society, just the way people came to like the system with Social Security after 1935, despite the fact that the right wing had opposed Social Security very strenuously, as they are now or have been opposing national health insurance in the past 20 years. So my view is that insurance, which is initially adopted because from a self-interested viewpoint, people are facing the same risks, and so everybody wants the insurance, then people begin to like the new society, and their preferences become somewhat more desiring of equality, and then they go farther. They pass new kinds of social insurance because their preferences have changed and they want to get rid of other kinds of poverty and other kinds of inequality. So I think a crisis can set in motion a sequence of insurance followed by preference changes followed by more insurance, which leads to more equality. And I think there are two major historical examples of this in recent history. One is the Great Depression, which made people so similar in their risk profiles that there was support for Social Security. And the other was the Second World War, which wiped out a lot of wealth in Europe and in Japan and homogenized people's risk exposures in that sense. And the consequence of the Second World War was a massive growth in the welfare state after the Second World War. That is to say, many more insurance programs were voted in by citizens as a consequence, I think, of the crisis of the war.
Okay. You cite the Scandinavian experience as particularly successful. Do you think the U.S. can learn something from them?
So I think Scandinavia is often cited as a special case because these are small countries, the Nordic countries, and they're, at least in the time when they enacted the legislation which brought about their welfare states, they were very homogeneous countries with respect to ethnicity and language and religion. And so many people say that there was a natural solidarity among Scandinavians because of their racial and
similarities
and religious homogeneity and so on. And so they had a natural feeling of solidarity for each other, and that's what engendered the large welfare states. I actually challenge that view. I think that the homogeneity of Scandinavia was important because it also meant that the people were very similar with respect to the risks they faced, with respect to illness and with respect to unemployment and longevity. So And I think it was that homogeneity of the risk exposures which made it easy for the welfare state to get started in these countries. And then the process that I mentioned, I think, took over, and the Scandinavian countries have gone much farther than simple self-interested insurance would require. Now, as far as the United States is concerned, you said, what's the lesson for the US? Well, the parallel I'm drawing is that we're now in a crisis which is going to homogenize people with respect to their risk exposures, at least the working class and the middle class to some extent. And I think that will form a powerful electoral bloc or support for social insurance, which will then change people's preferences. The difference, of course, between the United States and Scandinavia is that we have a very large minority population. We're a very heterogeneous country ethnically, and I think the racism that has been the result of slavery is the main reason that there hasn't been a larger welfare state in the United States until now. So it's been slow going here because of the history of slavery and the lack of solidarity that brought about between white and black citizens.
Okay, so what do you think is the future of capitalism here in this country?
It's very hard to say. I mean, I don't
have a crystal ball.
I don't have any crystal ball, and I think there are a lot of people who are much more knowledgeable about the financial sector than I am. A lot of economists like Joe Stiglitz and Paul Krugman and so on, and I look to them for instruction about the details of what's going to happen. But my hope is, as I've said, that the crisis will bring about more social insurance for the reasons I've outlined, and the consequence of that will be that Americans become more desirous of equality than they currently are. I mean, there are, let's face it, there are about 1/2 of the population of the United States does not particularly like more equality. I mean, this is probably a fair characterization of the people who voted for McCain in the presidential election, which was about half the population. So I think preferences have to change, and my hope is that the crisis will have that good effect. What the steady state will be, I don't know. I mean, how egalitarian will the United States become? Will it ever look like Sweden? Maybe in 500 years.
Wow. Okay, very good. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
For more information about Professor Roemer and his work, please visit our website at yale.edu/Macmillan Report. Be sure to join us again for another episode of the Macmillan Report, made possible through funding from the Whitney and Betty Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale.